guys, great to have special guests here from, I guess it's kind of global here. We got Mauritius, we got Detroit, and we got Los Angeles. So welcome everybody, Lucia and Derrick and Ed. Glad to have you all here in morning time, LA, but welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm glad you used the hand. That's the proper pronunciation of Derrick. It's with the hand. Very important.
Yeah. Although I've been trying to teach my hands when I'm doing this and there's people with a drink around me, I need to be careful because it's like
yes.
all that stuff goes.
Oh yeah. When I come over, you might want to break out the Tupperware. Let's just say that.
And a mop.
And a mop.
Say, you know, Italian, Jewish, whatever, it's all, you know, we're all the same. So, hey, this is going to be fun. There's a lot I think we can learn and most importantly, get to know each other a little bit better. So I'd love to start, ladies first, if you can just give Lucia, just give a little bit of an Italian personal introduction of yourself a little bit, and then we'll chat a little bit more. So what do you say?
Sono Lucia. I'm Lucia Brawley. I was born in San Francisco and raised in Europe and the States. And my background is that I was a ballerina. I went to Harvard, I went to Yale, became an actress in New York, Hollywood, and Europe, in theater, television, and film, got swept up in the Obama campaign, met this guy, and we founded a company, which we'll tell you more about.
Absolutely. Oh, that was great. So Derrick, what's up?
I'm pretty good, Mark. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure. So I'm Derrick Ashong, DNA, born in Ghana in West Africa, raised there as well as in Flatbush, in Riyadh, in Doha, Qatar. And every 4 years till I was 20, I moved to a new country. Like Lucia, I also went to Harvard. I thankfully avoided Yale and have been working at the intersection of entertainment and technology for most of my career.
Super cool. All right, now it's I guess we're boring compared to that, right? Right, Ed? You give us a little bit about you.
Even my name's boring.
You got to use the hands, though.
It's Ed from Detroit. So.
There you go.
Yes.
Enough said.
That adds so much flavor.
Wow, what a joy to be on with you guys. Mine is far less interesting in terms of mostly the corporate side. So I spent most of my life inside corporates, and not to say that wasn't interesting, but very different in kind of the structural frameworks that it was there. And in the early 90s, I was at the Kellogg Company, and then I went to Coke and Citigroup, and then Ford, and then ultimately Hershey Company. And the reality is most of those companies were very, very deeply purpose focused, and they were trying to figure out how to grow the company, but also do good in the world. And it was a really good education inside. And we launched a company maybe 6 or 7 years ago called Good Exchange, which is really trying to figure out how do you use real business money that is trying to drive profitable growth for a company, but in a way that also lifts people and communities at the same time. And so we started that company, and then we sold that 2 years ago. And now I'm very grateful to be a partner at Fifth Element Group with the guy who's the moderator, the guy with the hands, Mark. So
thanks, man. So I'm the token Canadian white Jewish guy on this thing.
You always gotta have one.
Gotta have one.
Yeah,
it's important. Somebody's got to bring the matzo ball soup or something. I don't know. But everybody knows who I am in that respect, from Montreal. Big hockey fan, and excited that with Ed and our other partners, we're really putting light on leaders who care, and showing why the leaders who do care actually do better in business and better for their communities as well. And that's why we're super excited to have both of you who are, at least in our opinion, and you're going to tell people why, leaders who care and why it's important and the impact you're having. So with that said, we're going to start ladies first, and we're going to send Derrick for a brief time to whatever color room you've got in there that's closest to green.
I think the one with the padded walls is where she usually sends me. So is that where I go?
At least I sent him with a tray of food.
Don't go too far. We'll get you back in a few minutes.
Sorry, the stools are sliding along the floor.
Now we can talk about them, right?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Here's the real.
Lizzie watches it.
So want to ask you. You talked about your background, actress, and everything and I noticed it's from early school, even, and probably a lot of times as a kid, creativity and you were kind of one. It looked like real quick writing and everything.
Yeah.
You probably even practiced some acting when you were waitressing way back when, I would say. So share with us what your why was then, and even more specifically, why did you decide to do what you do?
Great question. So I grew up in a creative family, so that was very natural as the air you breathe. It was to be creative. And my parents were novelists. All of their friends were, painters and dancers and sculptors and writers and actors. And so that was the environment that I grew up in. My parents were nomadic bohemians who lived all over the world. And they had actually come from humble beginnings. And so they treated art like a real job. I mean, they got up early, they made their hours, they did their work. And that's how I grew up for a long time. And so I started dancing ballet when I was about 2 years old and grew up going to the Joffrey School for Ballet in New York and dancing with the Joffrey Ballet. I was like a professional kid. I would come from school and go to the theater, City Center or Lincoln Center and get my paycheck. And that was my life. I thought I was going to grow up to be a ballerina, but I ended up getting injured in my teens. And the theater teacher from my high school kind of recruited me to start acting. And so I did that, but I went to Harvard because I loved academics. I loved learning. Harvard didn't have a theater major per se, but you kind of had free reign of the ART, the American Repertory Theater, which was a really great American regional theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they let us just, the inmates run the asylum. And so my major was English, but it was like my extracurricular, and my theater was more like my major. I kind of merged them, and I got to study at Trinity College Dublin and Oxford, and ended up going to the Yale School of Drama, and ended up going straight from graduation into a job on a soap, and then waitressing in New York and working in theater. Got discovered by Oliver Stone, who cast me in a film, which moved me out to Hollywood, and then continued doing theater, television, and film out there until I got discovered by a European filmmaker who brought me to Hungary. That's a book unto itself, and I did a few films in Hungary. It was a great adventure, and that was the why of it all is that I wanted to change the world through the arts. My parents brought me up with a very strong social conscience and sense of social justice, as well as a passion for the arts and creativity. And so my desire was to bring those two things together to change the world. And when I realized I wasn't doing that to the fullest of my ability, I started to shift more toward grassroots organizing and writing. And then it brought me full circle, and we'll get to that.
No, it's interesting. It's interesting because you talk about the world, and there's always the expression, it's a small world getting smaller and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Ed and I were both introduced to you by the same individual. And Ed, I want you to just chat a little bit about Michael and how he connected us. And it's just fascinating, from a very small village in Kenya, how we're all connected. So Ed, talk a little bit about how we both connected to Lucia.
Yeah, I loved hearing more of your story too, Lucia. I knew a part of it. So yeah, it's really, really fascinating. And I love the arts side, where you can bypass the head sometimes and go to the heart, but bring people together around even the common business that you're doing now. So yeah, you know what? I have a dear friend of mine, Michael, that I've known for a couple of years now, because of what I call my longtime sister, Pat Ware. And Pat Ware is somebody that we joke sometimes, talking about small world blended together. We had a dear friend of ours that used to call us twins, and we stuck with that for many years. We call each other twins, and you know, from an overt, I suppose, visual standpoint, she's an African American woman, and I'm obviously a Caucasian guy, but we were just very similar in terms of our personalities. And so we've been together on this sort of omni-win journey for many years. And then one day I was in DC, and she wanted to introduce me to a young man who she thought was remarkable and really very, very smart, but really deeply purpose-oriented and very kind. And I met him, and I really thought he was tremendous as well. And so our orientation, similar, is to, well, okay, that's amazing. He's doing amazing work. How do we help amplify what he's doing? Because the more he's successful, the more the world that we want to see is successful. And so these are the kinds of people that, of course, that we love to come alongside to the best of our ability and use whatever we have to be helpful. And so that's kind of, over the last couple of years or so, we've spent some time together. And then he started telling me about this this company that he had just started with. And it is another very small world that it was also plugged in with another dear friend of mine, Will Kennedy, at the UN. So it's all these concentric circles, and I don't know whether it's United Nations or whether it's companies and Nobel or entertainment industries, but it's people of purpose trying to figure out, how do I use what I have in order to bring that into the mix? Because everyone's got a unique ability or story or connectivity or gift to bring. And so it was just a really interesting dynamic how we all kind of came. And then when I saw you were interviewing, I'm like, hey, how are you interviewing this? So it's a very small world as it relates to that side of it, but it's fun to be on with you guys. So
yeah, Michael, shout out to Michael. He's a great example of, you know, if you really want to do something, you can come from anywhere and do something. And kudos to you and Derrick for recognizing that. And now he's chief of staff. I mean, wow, he's got a better title than I got. So
he's amazing.
Tell us some traveling, talking about the world, travel wise. I want to know where you got the travel bug from. Was it Trinity College Dublin? Was it from your family, as you talked about? And if you could share the value, I would love to hear your perspective, the value of your formal education, as well as things like when you volunteered for the 52nd Street Project.
Sure. Okay, awesome. So, well, first of all, you know, my dad hitchhiked around the world, and that's how he kind of developed his chops as a writer. And he did everything you could think of, from a black marketeer in Bombay to a journalist in Buenos Aires. So, I mean, that is an epic story. But so he met my mother in graduate school, and then he swept her along, and they were traveling for years before I was even born. So once I was born, they just kept traveling. We just, we went to Rome, we went to London, we came back to the States, and my mom decided she wanted to put down roots and started working in communications. So but they didn't let that stop them from imbuing me and inculcating me with more and more interest in the world at large. So they sent me to the United Nations International School. So I cut my teeth in the United Nations, and when they do Model UN, they do it in the assembly, in the General Assembly. It's so amazing. So yeah, so then and there I learned French, and I met kids from all over the world. And so the great thing about international school is wherever you go in the world, you always have somebody to stay with. And then, I kept traveling. Like in my summers in high school, I traveled in college. Like I said, I did my junior year abroad. And then it was always my dream to travel more through acting, and that fell into my lap with the opportunity in Hungary. But I never had the opportunity to go to Asia or Africa. So when I met Derrick, and he was born in Ghana, he'll tell you his story, but and he grew up in the Middle East. So I just started to really, really get bit by the bug to want to see more of the world. And as we started to develop our projects, we did one in Latin America, and then we decided to turn our attention to Africa for a variety of reasons. And then the universe just saw fit to move us here. So we live in Mauritius, East Africa, and this is Command Central for the Mike Africa, the show that we're doing in 6 African countries: Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Rwanda, and Mauritius.
Got it.
I have to always do that.
So what about your, education? Education's all different ways. So you had your, Harvard and Yale, which Derrick avoided apparently, the Yale part.
Yeah.
and your volunteering. Talk about that education-wise.
Okay, so I was very fortunate to have a great formal education, but I always wanted to translate that into a way to give back. So when I started acting in New York, I started volunteering at a wonderful, wonderful organization called the 52nd Street Project, as you mentioned, which basically takes kids from Hell's Kitchen and teaches them theater skills, playwriting and directing and acting, and you can also go and tutor. And so because I was also a nerd, I really enjoyed actually going and tutoring as well. And this was such an impactful turning point in my life and a direct antecedent to what I'm doing today. So there were kids in that program who were geniuses, but they were having trouble in their formal schooling. And so like one kid, he would play the piano and he would try to rebel he'd start playing the piano and rapping instead of doing his homework. And I said, you know what, just do the homework that way. Like read me the passage that way. And so he'd be like, John, went to the store, and then he went, and then he would rap the entire story. And I'm like, great, you just finished your homework, And then there was this little girl, and she was like really suffering. She had a lot of problems at home, and that was causing her a lot of difficulty in learning. And I remember like we were going through the multiplication tables, and she just didn't want to do it. She didn't want to focus. So I was like, fine, just rap it. And so she'd be like, 1 times 1 is 1, 1 times 2 is 2, and then we would just got through the times tables like that. And then that's when I realized, like, that hip hop is the poetry of the streets that inspires kids and makes them feel connected to learning. And I've seen, hip hop productions of Shakespeare and so on. And so you can really rally kids to a whole different passion and interest in learning that way. And in fact, that little boy, he's graduated college, he's gone on to do great things. He's been in movies and TV shows, so that at that time, I got together with some of my friends from Harvard, and I said, I'd love to create a global urban youth network, like TV network. And it's so funny because I hadn't met Derrick yet, but he had the same dream. And so that's basically what we're doing now.
So yeah, and I love that because education has taken on a new perspective right now, big time. And I remember, Ken Robinson, I think it is, one of the top TED Talk people.
Yes.
He talked about a ballerina that they found out, they were trying to calm her down. And then the doctor, she tells the story way better. The doctor realized they're giving her Valium, they're giving this to calm her down. And he turned on music when she didn't notice it. She started dancing. And she was African-American, I can't remember her name right now, but she became a famous ballerina. And there's different ways to express yourself, basically, and learn.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mark, too. And Lucia makes me think, too, when you were saying that, even things that became very, very popularized, like Hamilton, right? I mean, just educating.
Yes.
And it's this moment where you're able to pull in what's relevant, compelling, and there's something that already resides in the child that's deeply important. So how do you connect? How do you connect those two pieces? Well, okay, that's, as you've discovered, there are many different ways to connect. And once you connect with something that's already meaningful and significant and valuable and hopeful to that child, and then connect it back to something that they couldn't see any connection point back, that you made that bridge. That's awesome. I mean, I love that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna start doing it myself. I'm gonna start getting And, I'm going to start making corporate. I actually did some when I was at Deloitte.
Mark's got rhythm, man. He's got some rhythm. I've heard him.
I believe it.
For a Jewish guy, yeah, no, it's. I think we got to bring it into the boardrooms and everywhere, so getting it going.
Can I say something about that actually? Because I started writing about this stuff, at first for Huffington Post, and then I later started on other issues for CNN.com. But basically, what I was writing about is, how arts education is a matter of social justice and how it can change the world. And because of that, I started to get invited to things, Arts for America, Americans for the Arts, which is a lobbying group for arts and arts education. And all these different organizations started, in Yale School of Music invited me to speak. It just started leading to me finding all these other like-minded people who are out there and seeing the value of arts education and truly transforming lives. And one of the things that I realized is that I got the opportunity to go to the National Endowment for the Arts at the old post office, which is now the Trump Hotel. But at the time, it was the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And they had a youth orchestra play before their meeting. And so what I learned at that meeting is that before every meeting, they would have some kind of artistic performance, and that it would center them and unify them and bring them into the present and remind them of why they were there. And they talked about how they were the most efficient government agency. They did the most with the fewest resources, which is so true of the arts kind of across the board. And I just thought, what if you did that before every session of Congress? What if you did that in every government agency? How much better would our government run?
I have a client. It's the largest real estate developer, residential real estate, and the CEO once a month minimum would have everybody from corporate headquarters come down to this big area and sing together. And the accountants and engineers didn't like it initially. but you got into it. It's called love. It's called heart. It's called whatever you want to call it.
It really reminds me too. I love that. Actually, when we launched our company, we had Tim Fain. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, but he's a pretty well-known violinist, and then world-renowned astronaut who showed the Earth. So we set proper awe and context and understanding. So before we got to work, it was set underneath that understanding, that human connection point where we're all grounded together in what really matters in terms of relationship and connection and value. So I love that too. There's another one, Lucia, as well, where it makes me think we've worked with a group, makes me actually think it'd be really good for your for your company too. But it's a bunch of, you might know this group. They're out in Connecticut now. The name eludes me, but it comes out of the. It's a huge 50, 60 acre sprawling near Westport, Connecticut, and it's the lady who runs it is somebody who is very deeply connected in kind of the hedge fund world and that space. But they even bring in people, world leaders, and they deal with really difficult issues like human trafficking and things like that. But prior to that, they bring in the arts, the music, the awe-inspiring, the grounding, everything that you're saying that sort of sets it properly and opens people up properly. So it's a really, I love that.
It's not rocket science. And we'll talk more about this, but you guys should check out Kulu Lam. I don't know if you ever heard of Kulu Lam, but we'll talk about it. They bring people together of all ethnicities and whatnot, singing together. And it's what you're talking about. It's the slogan is singing is believing. And
wow.
Welcome back, Derrick. You're on the hot seat now, so to speak.
Awesome.
And I wanted to ask you. Your background obviously is in music and production and a whole bunch of stuff, really creative stuff. And I noticed you had a focus on, I want to say, ethnomusicology.
Yeah.
And was that a passion for you early in life? And if so, where did all that come from?
Okay, great question. So I didn't know what ethnomusicology was until I applied to graduate school. I thought I was going to go for an MBA because that's what you do. And I found out from one of my mentors, who's a professor at Berklee School of Music. He's like, man, why don't you go for a PhD? I was like, oh, but I want to be a professor. He's like, yeah, but you could get paid to study music. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, they'll pay you to do music. And I'm like, stop lying. Nobody pays you to do music. Even record labels don't pay you to do music. He's like, no, you could do ethnomusicology. And I was like, huh. So basically it's, you know, the anthropology of sound. And my particular focus in graduate school was actually the cultural anthropology of music and technology, basically looking at how changes in technology would change the future of media and entertainment. But on the music side itself, that was with me since I was, as long as I can remember. I mean, my mom used to say how when I was a baby, I would lie in the crib with my fingers doing this, and she'd say, oh, he's playing piano. And I grew up to play piano. And so like my friends are always like, you're always singing. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, my kids especially like, Daddy, you sing all the time. I was like, no, I don't. My wife is like, yes, you do. So it's just like that.
No, I think it's cool, and I think it sounds like it's either it's in you, it's just in you, but it gets opportunities to develop. And it's interesting. We were just talking to Lucia about education and how you guys have found that you know, there's a lot of kids that maybe don't like to read, but one book hits them at the right time and they read, or they don't know how to express themselves. There's different ways of expressing themselves. There's not one way to teach. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like people learn in different ways, you know, and like they find different things that kind of moves them. And so even with my own kids, like they learned to read like pretty quickly, and they did really well even in their early years of school. And people are like, oh, well, they're smart, they have smart parents. I mean, yeah, they're smart. They have at least one smart parent. I'll let you guys guess which one it is. But like, it's deeper than that. Like I used to drive my older daughter to school every day, and we would sing in the car, B-A-T, B-A-T, B-A-T spells bat, bat, C-A-T, C-A-T, C-A-T spells cat, cat. And we would do all of this stuff all the time. And then when we got bigger, the big one sang the song to the baby. And that's how they learn to read. You know, so I'm kind of like, I feel like we have, I went to a meeting today with the UN regional coordinator here in Mauritius at a school that is designed for children who've been kicked out basically of the traditional primary education system. And what they do is they take them from whatever age and they bring them into this new school where instead of having 40 kids in your class in the emerging market, you've got like 10 or 8. And they do the basics. They start with alphabets and 1 + 1 and all of the basic stuff. And then they build on that. And then once they get to be 15 or 16, they can either go back to regular school or they can go into vocational programs and they teach all this amazing stuff. And the entire philosophy is like, everybody doesn't learn the same way. Everybody's not gonna grow up to be an English professor. Doesn't mean they can't be successful. Doesn't mean they can't be amazing and brilliant. I had teachers tell me when I was younger, like, oh, you're something, 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 I'm gonna put you in special ed. Right. And I was like, but I'm like really smart, but I thought different than what they expected. And I went to Harvard because I thought I could, not because any of my guidance counselors thought I could.
Yeah. No, that's actually brilliant. I don't know if you ever saw a movie, it's an old movie, but a brilliant lady called Marva Collins. The Marva Collins story, she took kids that supposedly weren't making it and they did spectacular, and she refused to take government money because it meant she would have to teach the way they wanted her to teach. Check out that movie. It's been a long time, but Marva Collins was actually, I believe, even asked by Ronald Reagan to be Secretary of Education, and I think she declined to keep teaching.
Wow.
And but great stuff.
I love that, and I think it's a great example of how it comes down to real people. Like, I'll give you one example of a teacher. I haven't been in touch with her in years, but I'll never forget her. Her name was Mrs. Rabin, and she was in my junior year. I moved from the Middle East to the United States, and I did quite well when I was in my old school, was in the British system, and then I got out here, and it was a completely different system, and I had to sort of figure things out from scratch. But it's actually more rigorous in my old school, But these guys are like, oh, well, you don't have the prerequisites, so you're going to go in a lesser class. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I remember going to talk to the guidance counselors about where do I want to go to college. And I was like, oh, I want to apply to Harvard. And they're like, oh, okay, that's a good school. What else have you got in mind? I was like, oh, I'm thinking about Brown. And they're like, that's also a good school. And have you thought about a safety? I'm like, yeah, Brown is my safety. I mean, and the look on their faces, they're like, this kid. But Mrs. Raven, I wasn't even in her class. And she saw me speaking or doing something or whatever. And she's like, hey, I run the gifted and talented seminar. You should be in my class. I'm like, oh, well, how do I know if I'm gifted and talented? She's like, it's a ridiculous question. You should be in the class. And she put me in that class. When I talked to her about like, yeah, I want to go to Harvard. She's like, well, of course. And she took me to do a Model UN at Harvard. I mean, so, it's people like that who really open up the possibilities for a student who maybe thinks differently, which I definitely did, to also succeed. And the irony is, like, I would get super high test scores, by the way. I'd blow all the tests out of the water. But just because of my particular approach, they'd be like, yeah, but he can't be that smart. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it reminds me of stories where the kid in school gets lousy grades for doing an essay or a story or whatnot, and then the kid puts in a story written by John Steinbeck and still gets lousy grades, and then shows them it was John Steinbeck that wrote it.
Exactly. And then they sued him for plagiarism, because that's what happens next.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Derrick, makes me smile too, because in some ways, that teacher that you had, and I hope we can all be mentors like that, where you identify a unique gift, and you find that and you bring that out in people, and you allow the other person to see that in themselves in a way that maybe they didn't identify before. But people generally will live into the expectation you have for them, right? So she of course she would be a Harvard. So all of a sudden it completely sets the different perspective around, okay, well, it's like a 4-minute mile. Once someone kind of crosses something in their mind's barrier, well, of course I would be. Therefore, even how you approach the rest of your time in school towards Harvard, it's that you're holding yourself differently, you're thinking differently, and you're walking into that environment with a much higher likelihood to succeed, simply because they've allowed that seed that was inside you to be germinated, and they've recognized it and watered it and nurtured it. So that's the part of it too I love on the music side, where you can find people where they're at, and music is one of those things that cuts across age and gender and ethnicities and face, and you can have people in a concert with one of the musicians, let's say you're producing, and it can be just a completely eclectic mix, cross party, cross line, so you begin starting at a common point of understanding, and then who knows what can happen from that point. So love that. I love that story.
I believe in miracles. That's what can happen.
Exactly.
Hey,
and it speaks to all of us.
Yeah. So what is the Derrick Ashong experience? It's more than just you were on an Oprah radio show, excuse me, that you hosted, but it's your DNA to create positive impact. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I had a very interesting upbringing, as I mentioned. I grew up in a bunch of different countries, bunch of different cultures, bunch of different religions and ethnicities. It was very normal for me to, to just think that people were kind of all together. And it wasn't until I was growing up that I started to learn about racial and ethnic and cultural and religious divisions. And as I was sort of discovering these divisions, I'm thinking like, oh my God, like, I am gonna go to, church, and they're gonna tell me that, like, oh God, this the only way to Jesus Christ is the Son of the Lord our Savior, and the only way to get to God is through the blood of Christ. And then I will go to, like, when I grew up in the Middle East, I would be there and hear the prayer, call to prayer, and talk to my Muslim friends. And like, yes, there's but one God, and Muhammad is his prophet, and the only way to God is through the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. And then I would be, living in Riyadh and wondering, like, hey, how come there's no Jewish kids in my school? Nobody else was wondering, but I moved from Flatbush. I moved from Brooklyn. So this doesn't make any sense. It's really weird. Didn't get it. And as I start growing up, I'm like, oh, everybody's got a particular view and the particular path to salvation. And anyone who's telling you that this is the way and it's the only way is effectively telling you that everybody else who doesn't get it is largely going to hell. And I didn't believe that. I believe that if you have an idea of a greater power, then that greater power should be big enough, great enough, an alpha omega so powerful that it could speak to all of us where we are in our own language, in the way we need to hear it. And for some people that manifests as faith, as religion. Some people manifest as art. Some people manifest as science. Some people manifest as whatever it is, but that there's a way that the universe moves through us and draws from us the best that we have to offer if we are able to listen to those messages. And so for me, part of the way I think about impact is really about giving a voice to people, helping them to be the best of themselves, not prescribing, this is what makes you great, this is what makes you good. Obviously, the things that are, we kind of will universally be like, that's bad. We don't want to hurt other people. We don't want to make it so other people can't live their best life. But insofar as what is the manifestation of your life, that's you and your God. That's you and the universe. That's you listening to and absorbing the signals that are out there. And what those of us who have the privilege to be able to sit and talk and think about these things, I think should be doing, is figuring out how do you create ecosystems where people have that chance to find the best of them, instead of putting them all into lockstep, where inevitably everyone is not going to fit that same model. And as a person who never fit those particular models, like I did a personality test once for this, I went and did this corporate event, and they had all of the people at the agency do the test, and they said, oh, the speaker should do one too. And then they had an executive call me afterwards, because I got there that day. I wasn't there to do it early in the week like the employees. And so he's like, yeah, Derrick, really interesting, the results from your test. And I was like, oh, really? What was it? Like, was it cool? What am I good at? He's like, well, I'll have to say this is a very rare result. We actually haven't had anyone test this way before. But the short of it is you will either be homeless or a CEO. I was like, oh, sounds like a CEO. I mean, so, it's like everybody has their own way. And for me, I've been growing up in so many different places that I can make myself fit in different circumstances. But I know I think different. And that's why I relate to other people who do too.
Yeah, they could even call that diversity, maybe. Who knows? They could call
Imagine that.
Or like, and even inclusion. I mean, there's an interesting word. Although one word I don't like is tolerance. And I know there's good intent behind it, but who the hell wants to be tolerated?
So what a friend of mine used to run the Museum of Tolerance in LA. And, I was always thinking about that. But I feel like, you're right. We want to get to more than tolerance. We want to get to acceptance and hopefully even understanding.
So with that, where's your better half? Can we grab her back in?
Yes, we can. Sugar pie? Let's do this.
Hold it. Sugar pie, honey bun,
You know that I love you. That's right. I can't help myself. Let me get out of the hot seat.
This is the wonderful thing about being married to a musician, is you get serenaded regularly.
Well, me and Ed have bunked together in hotels, and I do sing. So
yeah, he sings a lot. You give any word.
There you go.
Not well. Who cares, right? So hey,
that's okay. You have a song in your heart.
Exactly. We're in a good spot. I just want to ask you before we get into AMP, which is I'm really excited about. That is with all the things, the really cool things that you guys have said, and just the way you be is really awesome. And do you think with COVID going on and technology still speeding around and racial and social justice finally hitting the tipping point, and someone described it to me as, you remember that old movie with Cher called Moonstruck? I don't know if you remember that movie, and Nicolas Cage tells her he loves her.
Love that film.
She slaps him across the face and says, "Snap out of it." And I just wonder if Mother Nature or God, the universe, whoever it is telling us that. What do you think? Is there awakening going on that maybe because we have more time to think about what's important?
You want to go?
I would say yes. I would say, but it's, it's like that, the arc of moral justice, you have to bend it. So if it's an awakening or it's the end, it's up to us, but the power is in our hands. And that's what take back the mic means to us, is we taking back the mic and taking back the power to choose which direction we go, if it's an awakening or not, and we choose awakening.
Want to add to that, Derrick, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's the end at all. I think it's very much an awakening. I think a lot of people are starting to see the world in new ways. I think that in a way, this is like a preamble to bigger problems. When we talk about things like climate change, some people will continue on about how it doesn't exist. It's not man-made. 99.9% of the scientists all agree, and then the news is going to bring two guys to act like it's a 50-50 split. Ridiculous. But it's easy to make that happen because climate change seems to happen slowly. And there's lots of ways you can confuse people. And by the time you reach a tipping point where you can't return, you don't really even realize the magnitude of the crisis you're creating. Now here comes COVID. Very quickly, people are dying. I mean, and it could be worse. There are a pandemic of this level of virulence and a higher degree of lethality could also be dangerous, but COVID is particularly insidious because so many people can be okay that it can spread like wildfire. So some more dangerous pandemics don't spread as far, like an Ebola or whatever. Airborne, deadly, but not too deadly, so mad people can get it. It's a big crisis, and because we start seeing the hospitals overwhelmed, people losing loved ones, now all of a sudden it's a global crisis where we have to act. And we see precisely what happens when people pretend that science doesn't matter. We see quickly the results, which we don't with climate. Now, the question for me in an environment like this is, are we wise enough to take the lesson? Are we wise enough to understand what Mother Earth is telling us? That like, hey, there are things that you can't handle unless you work together, and that science is real. Or are we so foolish that we'll just slough it off because somebody's making money off of the status quo and then go tackle the real big issues in the same foolish manner, in which case we will suffer terrible consequences. So I'm very hopeful. I think this is a moment for all of us to open our eyes.
It strikes me too, Derrick, and as I think about that is all of us have spent a lot of our lives traveling to different places in the world, living different places and seeing different communities in a variety of different ways. And it really struck me, one of our dear friends runs World Food Programs. His name's David Beasley, and they just won the Nobel Peace Prize a couple of days ago. And he's forever sort of trying to shine a light on, there are many COVIDs happening all over the world every single day. And it really struck me that I remember early on in 2020, we were looking at trying to help bridge a gap of a $3 billion gap. This is prior to COVID starting. It was very difficult because people, the money, it's tight, etc. And then as soon as it got close to almost killing, quote, on us, like, wait a minute, that actually literally could kill me. And then we found $3 trillion. it's like
brilliant.
I mean, there's so many resources, there's so much, but then when it wanes, if it comes out of something that's very close to me, and you go in concentric circles further and further and further out, it becomes extremely relevant, of course, to wherever it's at. But the focus and the energy and the urgency and the money and the resources are not there. And so you're starting to wonder, like, well, wait a minute. This whole idea of being interconnected, to me, I'm just really using that holistic view mainly to make the point that we are, number one. Number two is that the reality is that what you ignore anywhere in the world could potentially end up, if you're fearful, if you want to, and you're looking at doing something preventative, where you're looking at sort of a general omni win for everyone, or you can wait till it hits you from left field, and then you're going to spend 1,000 times more. But so to me, it was just a heightening of a recognition that there are so many incredible people who are super talented, incredible human beings that are in these dire circumstances, and they have been year after year after year, but there's no money, there's no attention until it starts hitting really close to home, And then of course there's money. It just shows and highlights that to me.
It manifests all of a sudden.
Sorry, that brings us to something called AMP Global Technologies. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, are you there?
I have.
So I want to ask you guys, because y'all bring up good points with the awakening. COVID, someone said this to me the other day, COVID is killing people, but it also shows us all the mistakes we made before that put people more at risk to die from COVID, whether it's health or things like that. So first tell us, with respect to coming together, why did you found AMP Global Technologies?
Okay, so we founded the company in part because I've been working in media and entertainment for a long time. I'd worked with a lot of luminaries in the field, got to work, as you said, with Oprah, Steven Spielberg, worked with big companies from BET to, Al Jazeera, ABC, Disney. And at one point had scaled these interactive media assets to 300 million households around the world and realized we had no idea who was watching any of it. And I kept thinking, like, why is it that, like, everything I do, I work in tech and entertainment. So everything I do on the tech side, super data driven. Everything I do on the entertainment side is kind of touchy-feely. I'm an artist, the touchy-feely is important. But I was like, is there not a way to bring some quantitative rigor to these qualitative processes? And so we set out to basically build a big data engine for the media and entertainment audience industry, right? So you could think of AMP as big data for big media. We let media know the audience the way e-commerce knows the customer. But we did something a little bit different from how it would typically be thought of in like Silicon Valley, which is we decided, why don't we what's the most important person in this value chain? It's actually the audience, it's the fan. It's not the creator. As much as I love and respect creators as one myself, if you're a creator with no fans, nobody's really caring what you do. Right? If you have fans with no creators, the fans become the creators. So the fan is the one who begins, right? We were so sad to lose Eddie Van Halen this past week. But Eddie Van Halen was a fan before he became a musician, before he became a legend. So the fan is where it starts. And what we look at is, how do you let the fan control their data? And the people who want to engage with them need to give them an incentive to share that data. And I can go into more about how that works, but basically that's what we did. We made it a system that's a big data engine that still protects user privacy and gives fans the power to share their information and gives brands the ability to reward those fans. And the initial reward is actually mobile data. And that's why we're here in Africa, because and specifically in Mauritius, because we've built this engine that makes it possible for fans to earn mobile data by watching and amplifying incredible creative talents from their communities. And it makes a win for the artists, the media partners, the brands, as well as the telecom companies, and ultimately.
And that's a great point, because talk to us about how or further about how you're combining artistry and technology to actually solve the digital divide, which looking at some of the materials and researching, the low percentage of people that have access is unbelievable.
It's absurd. I'll give you a stat and then an anecdote. So during the first 6 weeks of the lockdown period, internet usage worldwide went up 70%. In Africa, it was flat at 7% 4G usage. Why? Because Africa has the highest mobile data cost in the world, paying more money than rich countries do. And so we're looking at well, how do you address that? How do you think about this? And one of the things we came up to is wait a minute, we don't have to reinvent the wheel with the solution. Look at the successful technologies in the media entertainment space. Arguably, the two most successful are television and radio. And why were they successful? Because all you had to do was buy the box. You buy the box and everything else came for free as long as you pay electricity. What do you do when it comes to mobile? You buy the box, then you got to buy the bandwidth to be able to do anything with the box. Then you got to get the Netflix subscription to be able to get the content using the bandwidth you just paid for on this expensive box. That's how you're done. I mean, you barely have money for lunch. So we said, why not learn from what the successful aspects of the entertainment industry have already done and built a model for ad-supported mobile data. And that's what we've done. People come in, they engage, they watch, they share. It's a gamification engine behind the system at the core of the algorithm. It can tell that, oh, this user was in the top 10%, top 5%, top 2%, whatever. Top 10%, you get 100 megabytes from McDonald's. Top 5%, you got 500 megabytes from Coca-Cola. Top 2%, oh snap, you got like a gigabyte from courtesy of Nike. Now, all of a sudden, when you accept that, they know who you are because they have to in order to give it to you. And now you build a longer-term synergistic relationship that's mutually rewarding and beneficial. And if you do that, you can bring media companies, ad agencies, brands, telcos, influencers, celebrities, organizations, everyone together to solve that digital divide. And so we created an initiative called 70 by 2025, 70 by 25. How do we take Africa from 7% mobile 4G penetration to 70% by the end of 2025? And we're super excited, and we've got some amazing partners that have signed on to realize that dream.
So Lucia, you talked before about how do you bring that into the boardroom type of thing. So it's got to be a combination of the brands, and I want Ed to speak to this too, the brands are going to get the ROI, but they're also going to get the impact that they're making. And again, it goes right to leaders who care. Leaders who care about people and community will do better in business. Lucia, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, as you say, it's a double bottom line, right? It's good business, and you're getting to fish in a barrel in terms of young audiences with compelling content, and at the same time enabling them to continue interacting with your brand more and more and more, because they don't have to, there's not this huge barrier to entry. For example, in Africa, there's just such a high cost of data on top of the other barriers that they face. And if you enable them to get online, there's all this innovative energy and ingenuity here that now has the resources and tools to participate in the economy and compete with their peers in the global marketplace, because that now they can bank and get financial literacy. Now they can create content. Now they can promote content. Now they can do e-learning. This is why we're partnering with NGOs like the UN, UNESCO, and UNHCR, because this, by digital inclusion, is the umbrella under which you can press fast forward on achieving all of the UN Sustainable Development Goals by the goal year of 2030. That's 10 years. How are you going to do it so fast?
Exactly.
Well, get billions of people online so that they can participate in creating the solutions.
Before going to you, Ed, I want to hear the corporate perspective from you too, but sounds like it ties into what we talked about, education and doing things differently too.
It's all about thinking differently. I mean, literally, we're looking at a problem that's been sitting here the whole time. And by thinking a little bit from a different perspective, it's like, here's how, this solution won't work for just a telco or just a brand or just a TV station or just a startup. But you start bringing them all together, it could actually be incredibly powerful and make a massive impact on the ground.
What do you guys think from, on the corporate side? You mentioned a couple brands, and I think they're great ones, obviously, as well. And from your vantage point, and because I love the perspective of having worked at 5 Fortune 500 companies myself, and having kind of looked through the lens of how do you solve a business issue where it's also having that sort of double bottom line or triple bottom line at the same time, because oftentimes you can find a competitive advantage because you can connect to a marketplace in a way that's a lower cost and deeper engagement and higher brand warmth. And it's a virtuous circle effectively. Do you have a couple of different ones where if you were the brand CEO, is it a Verizon or AT&T? Is it the CEO of Coke? Who are the ones that you would be really helpful for, in your perspective, in terms of entering into the market? I mean, there's going to be any brand who obviously wants to enter, but are there a handful or a couple that you could put out, and then we'll use this little clip and go to our friends who run those companies?
I love that.
it.
I love that. So I want to be careful because I don't want to say the one and then not the other. But I'll give you a little bit of
category.
I'll give you the category. Like, for example, like you're talking about some of these CPG companies. We think it's a natural fit for them because all these young people are buying these fast-moving consumer goods. Then you've got like some of the handset manufacturers. I mean, if you talk about getting more people onto 4G, oh my God, the average revenue per user for an actual 4G device is much, much greater than a 2G or 3G. We're thinking about some of the companies that are in fashion. Young people want to look cool, whether it's sports, fashion, or lifestyle, whatever, all of that comes into play. And then what we did, and I'll explain why in a second, is something that we think is very attractive in the automotive sector because of how do you move and how do you see things. And why do I say that? Why automotive and consumer electronics and fashion and lifestyle, why do they all matter? Because the way in which we enter the market is not by going in and be like, we are going to change the world, or please download an app. No, it's like, here's a show. Very briefly, if you ask people what are the hottest shows on the continent, they'll be like, oh, Big Brother Africa, BB Niger, you know, X Factor, Real Housewives of Johannesburg. Like, okay, that's all good. You know, we're open-minded, it's cool. But all of this came from outside in. Where's the like African format that's born here and then we brought to the rest of the world with our own cultural perspective? Never been done. There's never been a format coming out of the continent. There's no X Factor that we made. So that's what we did. We created a show called Take Back the Mic, the World Cup of Hip Hop. And we did it in Brazil, Colombia, Jamaica. It was part Anthony Bourdain, part American Idol. You discover the city through the eyes of the artist. You use the app to curate and cast as the fans who represents your country. Then we're going to see the heart of Medellin and Kingston and Mexico City, Santo Domingo, Rio, right? Through the eyes of the artist. That got 2 Emmy nods for Outstanding Interactive Programming, back to back, and led to all kinds of cool stuff. We have a partnership with ITV and with Apple and all this cool stuff. So what happened there is we're like, well, what if you took that and you took it to Africa where we don't have an African format, and we built it into a TV format, still interactive, but now all of a sudden you're capturing the audience by saying, hey, you, watch this travel show that's all about the cities that nobody really knows and understands. And you started with the Mic Africa. And you see the city discovered through the eyes of a dancer, of a graffiti artist, of an MC, or a beautiful, amazing singer. Now you go to the brand and you're like, we got your devices, we got the travel, we got the fashion, the style, the cool factor, celebrity judges at the end, and this beautiful competition where we say, whichever artist wins, 6 countries, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda, South Africa, and Mauritius, 6 countries, whichever artist wins, we're gonna give 100 megabytes of mobile data to every person, every user in their country. And that's how you kick off your digital inclusion campaign. So the brands, and we looked at what is the cost. It's like the cost of acquiring a user for, what is it like, traditional search advertising, like $45 a customer acquisition cost. You know, if it's like display ads, a $79 customer acquisition cost. We looked at what is the cost to deliver a dope brand experience, a 30-second commercial, all of this engagement, and the data of the users who opt in to participate. 20 cents per user. I mean, it's a no-brainer. And so we're trying to make the corporate case for a different way of thinking about inclusion and do it in a way that's fun and that's hip. Art meets technology to serve society.
Yeah, I love that part. One thought. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Mark. Your show.
Yeah, we can continue. We can continue. But I wanted to ask you, for at least for completion of this part, and we'll have to do a sequel, obviously. I guess that's what we do in LA, right? We keep wanting for more, and that leads to
no doubt
investing in the sequel. But so just chat briefly about why the development of Africa, to which you're obviously positively contributing, is also important to the whole world.
Africa is the youngest population on the planet. It is literally the future. And what happens is people, as you were saying earlier, will look at their problems that they face, and if it's somebody else's problem, they don't consider it. You know, people will talk about migration, and we don't migrants, and this and that, and immigrants and drama. Yeah, but look at the exploitation that has happened in some of these societies over centuries. And so they don't have the resources to live their best lives. And so they come and search of those resources, often to the places which extract the resources in the first place. People have this impression that Africa is so poor. Africa is so poor. These poor Africans, you see the commercial, a kid with a fly in their face, and we're never gonna buzz away the fly because that's bad for our marketing. We gotta get those charity dollars. I'm like, listen, man, the problem facing Africa is not that Africa is poor. Africa is so rich, so wealthy, so full of resources, material, human, cultural, creative, everything you could imagine, that it's been exploited for hundreds and hundreds of years. And what can happen is if you allow Africa and its human and cultural capital to step into its own place in the world, everybody gets richer. Everybody does better, because this continent has been giving the whole time. All we're asking is that people should also benefit from what they've brought to the table. And it's a different way of thinking than the days of past. But the ways of thinking of the past have gotten us to this point where our world is in the verge of collapse. Why not try something new? Why not invite everyone to the table to serve humanity?
And also to make a lot of money. I mean, seriously, if you think 1.3 billion young consumers untapped, that, I mean, the business case makes itself, in addition to it obviously being the right thing to do.
And to that point, as is very well stated, you know, 25 years ago, everybody was talking about, oh my God, the hot market is Japan. The future is Japan. They were not thinking really about China. And we were talking about, oh, most favored nations or whatever. China decides what kind of favor their nation gets now. Right? 20 years ago, like India, oh my God, like Ayurveda, it's so good with yoga. But we're not really thinking about them as a viable market. Like we might, you know, get them to do some call centers. India is its own market today, right? Africa, you'd be like, how many people you got in Mauritius? 1.3 million. Ghana, maybe you got 20 million. How many do you get in Burundi or Lesotho, right? And then yet, if you're an entrepreneur in India, you get, I got 1.3 billion people. Africa's got 1.3 billion people too. But we're living in these old colonial silos that don't make any sense. By wiring everybody, they can connect with each other. Now your entrepreneur coming out of Kigali or coming out of, you know, Harare can say, I got a market of 1.3 billion, invest in me. That's what we're talking about. And it can have a powerful ripple effect across multiple sectors.
Well, the only thing I can say music-wise is my favorite song is Imagine, and then the Beatles song Come Together. So
yes,
let's do it. Hey, you guys are leaders who care. There's no doubt about it. Super happy to have you on this, and we look forward to great things ahead and working together with you too.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of the day out there.